You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions Special Episode 40.
Welcome to the 40th Supplemental Log episode of the Tricorder Transmissions. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar with our supplemental series, this is our catch-all show that allows us to tackle any Trek-related topic we want. And tonight, we're even bending that rule to cover the premiere of the new sci-fi comedy series, The Orville. So before we get started with the show, I actually want to take a brief minute to mention that we've set up a brand new Patreon page to help us keep the show up and running, and you can find it at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions, or by visiting our website and clicking on the big Patreon link on the right. If you enjoy what we do here on any of our Tricorder shows, please consider supporting us. Every little bit helps, and we're currently working on our Patreon rewards for people who do support the show right now, so keep your ears on the show and your eyes on the website for those announcements about what we're going to be offering for any awesome person who decides to become a patron of the Tricorder Transmission. So thanks for that. Okay, so back to the show. So this past weekend, the first episode of The Orville aired on the Fox network. And so far, from what I've been seeing online, the reactions have been somewhat mixed. I think it's got a middling score on Rotten Tomatoes at this point, as far as the critics are concerned. And I think our discussion tonight will also be a bit mixed. Since we're talking about a new show also, I think it's appropriate that we bring on two brand new guests to the Tricorder Transmissions here. And starting off with a friend and a listener who's been with us since the very beginning, over 4 years ago, and rumor has it he's listened to every single Tricorder episode to date. I think that's true, and we'll have to ask him. He's a time travel expert and the creator of ParadoxParkway.com. Mr. Steve Sikoryak, welcome finally to the Tricorder Transmissions.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here. Yes, long-time listener, first-time caller.
And have you actually listened to every episode of the show?
I actually have, yes, listened to every word of every show.
That's amazing. Really amazing. I wonder if anybody else out there has listened to every single episode. If you have, let us know. That's a pretty cool milestone. Second guest to the show is a Trek Ranks fan. We've had a lot of great exchanges over Twitter since Trek Ranks launched, and he's the writer behind the Listening to Film blog. The one and only Mr. Carl Wonders is here. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. We've been trying to get you on for a while now, everybody out there in listener land. Carl's been wanting to come on and talk about the animated series for a while, but we've been a little delinquent in getting our animated series back online. So we're planning on getting that back started up again sometime in October of this year. So with every new guest that we have on the show, it's a tradition for the Tricorder Transmissions to talk a little bit about each person before we start getting into the show. So, Steve, I mentioned in your intro that you have a awesome website called Paradox Parkway. You tell us a little bit about that, and then a little bit about your Star Trek history?
Sure. So Paradox Parkway is a longtime passion of mine. It's trying to bring together the world of confusion, illusion, and delusion. I enjoy a good paradox. I like to be confused. And along with that, I'm a big fan of time travel. So the data that I'm compiling onto the site supports both of those interests. So that's been a fun ride so far. As to a Star Trek fan, I'm there from the very beginning. I watched the original series live back in the 60s. I attended the 1970s Star Trek conventions in New York, those original ones, and just been a lifelong fan. So great to be here.
Wow, awesome. I think I remember seeing pictures that you've showed me. Steve and I work together, full disclosure, everybody. I see Steve just about every single day of the week. He's in the cube next to me. So he showed me some pictures of those early days at the Trek conventions, and someday maybe you'll come on Shore Leave and talk about some of those memories.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So, Carl, how about your Listening to Film blog and a little bit about your Trek history?
Sure. So the blog is a fairly new endeavor of mine that it's been something I've been thinking about doing for a while. And It's been a bit of fits and starts, to be perfectly honest. Life stuff comes in the way and gets in the way of regular posting, and I'm hoping to get back into it. But it's a way of combining two things that I really enjoy: film and film music. I'm writing, I call them reviews for the most part, but they're really just kind of looks at films and the scores that go with them. I'm not a film major or anything like that, so it's a completely amateur opinion. I also am one of the people who would much rather talk about something I like rather than something I dislike. So you're not going to find very many negative reviews on there. They're all things that I enjoy, and I'm actually working my way through the Star Trek film series right now. I'm hoping to finish up a post on Star Trek 4 in the next couple of days. So maybe by the time the listeners hear that, that'll be up. As far as Star Trek goes, I had a slightly inauspicious start to Star Trek, to be honest. When I was about 5 or 6, my mother, who was in college when the original show came on, said, we taped this movie off of Showtime back when taping was a thing. I think you'd like that. And it turns out it was Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. So the first exposure I ever had to Star Trek was Star Trek 3. Around that time, right after I loved it, of course. And strangely enough, the first TOS episode I ever saw was Spock's brain. So I have a real love, quality aside, I have a real love for Spock's brain simply because it got me into TOS. And then, I'm of the age of the people who sat down at exactly the right time in their life to watch The Next Generation when it premiered. And I grew up on The Next Generation, into Deep Space Nine, and a little bit of Voyager. And I'm hoping to actually fill in the Voyager that I lost when I went off to college and then grad school, along with Enterprise in the coming weeks. Netflix was made for people like me who missed some of the episodes.
So you're going to do some binge watching, I assume, sometime down the road?
That's my hope. Yeah, I'd love to sit down and maybe, not live blog, but maybe write up some thoughts along the way. It's been a while since I saw some of the Voyager episodes, and there are some that I actually never got around to seeing when they were originally on. So it'll be a fun experience. I'm looking forward to it.
That's still coming down the road. The Orville is tonight's topic, and that show started last weekend. So we thought it would be appropriate to just gather a few of us together here and get some reactions from people who listen to the show and other Star Trek fans. So I guess we'll jump in with our overall impressions of the first episode of the Orville. I mean, did it grab you? Did it resonate with you? Were you happy with it? What were your overall thoughts? So Carl, let's start with you. What was your overall feeling of the show in general? What was your takeaway?
Overall, I would say that I was somewhat pleasantly surprised. I'm not the biggest Seth MacFarlane fan. I liked Family Guy when it started, and as his works have expanded, I kind of lost interest because I kind of found him doing almost the same thing over and over again a lot of ways. And when it was billed as this comedic take on Star Trek, almost like a parody, at least that's the way it was billed, I was a little hesitant around it. But when I watched the show, I realized that I think they need to talk to their marketing people a little bit, because I think it was missold in a way. And I think that could lead to a lot of why there are people who are complaining about it not being, as comedic as they may have liked, so and so forth. But I went in with relatively low expectations and came out thinking, yeah, I think this is a show that I can at least stick with for a little while, if not all the way through.
Interesting. Steve, do you have a differing opinion?
Yeah, I'm going to quote Willy Wonka and say what Carl said: strike that, reverse it. Because I actually had a different expectation. I heard Seth MacFarlane talk about it. He was downplaying the comedy and pointed out that a sitcom with a half an hour would go a certain way, but since he chose to go an hour, he sounded like he was pitching a sci-fi show with some comedy in it. So, and I saw a couple of clips, and like you said, Carl, I'm not a big Seth MacFarlane fan overall, but I do appreciate his talent and his drive. I like a lot of the things he's into. I like that he was connected to Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson, so that, in his singing career, and so talented guy. But when I heard him talk about the show, my expectations were actually higher because I said, oh, maybe he's going to do a good spoof. I have a something I'll bring up later about another spoof, but I think Galaxy Quest is a successful, Star Trek twist with comedy. So I said, okay, let's see what you got. My overall take, Jeff, would be disappointed. We can get more into some of the details, but my expectations were a little higher, and then it didn't really hold up.
Interesting. So yeah, and funny you mentioned Galaxy Quest because I was going to bring that up myself, and that was my initial when I heard about this show a while ago. That was my initial expectation was Galaxy Quest on television, and that was kind of the bar that I was holding it up to for a while. And I guess after seeing a bit of the trailer and hearing and reading some interviews and things, I sort of tempered that a bit because I started to think more along the Seth MacFarlane line. I've been a Family Guy fan for a long time, but I will confess that live action Seth MacFarlane it never really resonated with me. So I was kind of trying to temper my expectations a little bit, and I wouldn't say I'm disappointed. I actually really did enjoy it. I really liked the high production value. I was surprised at how good the effects were and how much money they invested, obviously, into that and the sets and the makeup. Some of the makeup is really, really good for a television show. They have a high bar to live up to now, I think, with all the Netflix and Amazon and HBO and Showtime shows with these humongous budgets. I guess they didn't really have a lot of choice there, but some of the jokes, though, did kind of fall flat for me. There were some really good laughs, though. Maybe we can talk about some of those later. I think for as a middle ground between sci-fi and comedy, it works for me. I could use maybe a little less comedy and a little more sci-fi, but I'm not at a point where I'll be saying that I won't watch anymore. I'm definitely looking forward to this week's upcoming episode and future episodes. So I'm going to reserve my final overall judgment for a few more episodes in and say that I'm still optimistic on it. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny that both you and Steve brought up Galaxy Quest because that was kind of my first inkling or inclination towards it as well, and I didn't mention that. But and I think in thinking about it, I've watched it twice and just trying to figure out, because I think Galaxy Quest works way better as a comedy and as a parody than the Orville does, and trying to figure out why that is. And I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I mean, if you've read the 50-Year Mission, the Ed Gross, Mark Altman book, Seth MacFarlane does the intro to that book, and it's clear that he has a really strong love for Star Trek and the material. And I think that's almost to his detriment in a way when he's doing this, because he's not poking fun at the Star Trek concept, which is what Galaxy Quest did so well. Here he's telling a earnest story set in a Star Trek-like universe and throwing in jokes. He's not picking at it. He's not making fun of, the fandom or the there's no William Shatner parody in there or anything like that. It's just, a material that he loves that he's putting his own spin on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with that. And the more I thought about it as I watched it, the more I realized that it is not intended to be a parody. It's meant to be its own standalone show, almost an homage to Star Trek in a way, with some humor added in, sometimes maybe a little too much humor added in. Some of the jokes were a little overdone. But overall, though, I think that that's why I'm trying not to lay too much judgment on the first episode, because I think maybe as the series drags on, I think maybe some of the jokes that seemed overplayed in this first episode will be kind of starting to fade out of the picture, especially the ones around the relationship difficulties between the captain and his ex-wife. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later on when we talk about the characters. But I thought some of those jokes were a little bit overdone. Steve, I know you had a similar opinion.
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned the production values, which are outstanding. It's nice to have a budget. I'm sure that Fox was, whatever you want, Mr. MacFarlane, get him whatever he needs. So that was good. So, nothing lacking there. Another overall feeling I had was, from a Star Trek perspective, I get enough good Star Trek elsewhere. At least in this first episode, this show didn't give me anything to satisfy that need, and the comedy was a little weak, so it didn't satisfy that need. So I said, so what's the pull here? It didn't. If it was great on one and weak on the other, I'd feel like something. I noticed Brandon Braga's name in the credits. I didn't do a thorough list, but so he's got some, he's got some firepower behind him. I'm sure supporting this. You had mentioned you'll talk about the characters later. I won't get into that. But one other thing I wanted to mention in terms of a spoof, I'm sure you guys never heard of this show, but in the 70s, after Star Trek was on, there was a show called Quark. QUA.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
With Richard Benjamin in the lead. It lasted one season, which was probably longer than it needed to. It was he was flying a garbage scow through space. It was a direct Star Trek spoof, and complete with, adventures in quotes, played for laughs. And it was a little weak. Production values weren't as great. I will share one quick line. I still remember from 40 years ago when I watched it. This Spock-like character was talking to one of the female characters, and she said, "How do I look?" And he said, "Well, first, light passes through the retina to the optic nerve." Which I thought was hysterical. So I kept coming back, but it was a tough reviewing sometime later. So parody is tough.
It is, but getting back to Seth, one thing that I wanted to mention before we move on to anything else, and since Carl brought this up, I could see when I was watching this episode, I could see Seth's love for the material coming through. So I don't want to discount that. He obviously is a huge Star Trek fan, and we all know that. And I think that he actually, I agree with Carl, maybe to his detriment, maybe he was trying a little harder to get his point across and to show his love for Star Trek. And there's many references in this episode that I think are direct Star Trek references. So, I think.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, you have to be a Star Trek fan to name one of your races a Selayan.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah.
I'm hoping she climbs some steps at some point. I think that would be a nice little homage. But
something else Seth mentioned in one of his interviews about the show, and it's something Jeff and I have talked about. Remember how bright original series was, and how monotone almost the other series were, and that always bothered me because I always enjoyed I know it was color TVs they were selling in the 60s, but still, I like that environment, and the newer shows didn't tend to have that. Seth mentioned that.
Yes.
Did you notice how bright the show was? This felt like original series Star Trek, not, the subsequent series. So, so yes, he has the passion, and that's great because, there was some concern on the Discovery side of, who's driving the ship here in terms of the passion. Seth definitely has the right mindset for this.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks for bringing that up because I didn't catch that bit of that interview. And that's something that I know we have talked about quite a bit, is the more drab color palettes. And I think that actually extends into a lot of other television shows nowadays. It seems like everything is very dark. And that was one thing that I found that was pretty refreshing about the Orville, is you have some bright, colorful sets. Nothing really felt overly heavy. And some of my friends, if they listen to this, they'll probably want to reach through the speaker and choke me because I keep saying this, but I'm getting to the point where I'm so burnt out on everything being dark and dreary and heavy and dramatic. I think maybe that feeds into me liking this show maybe more than I would have, sometime in the past before all of these dark shows started happening. So I think I'm almost getting desperate for more comedy and more upbeat things on television. Carl, do you agree or?
No, I definitely agree. I mean, as far as the color palette, I mean, you can tell in the the uniforms almost to me were right out of Galaxy Quest, if anything else. But I mean, the color palette, although I will say that some of the sets on the ship itself seemed derivative more of the Hilton in space feel of the Enterprise D than anything else. I mean, at least the control panels and things, there were more colors there, but it had that loungy feel to it. Steve had mentioned Brennan Braga's name. I think I saw Andred Bormanis' name as well, who has a connection to Trek, if I'm not mistaken, in the credits somewhere. And since it's, you know, kind of my thing with the blog, I also want to throw out, since we mentioned the production values, that Bruce Broughton turns in a fantastic score to the episode. Yeah. I told Jeff that I'd watched, you know, the episode again last night, and I had the theme song running through my head the whole time. But I think, you know, to get somebody like him who's done films like Silverado and Young Sherlock Holmes and a few others in the past on, and I think he has people like John Powell and some other top-notch composers to write music for the show, just shows that, if anything, he certainly has a lot of clout to bring these people together to make something.
Yep. And quick sidebar just for you, Carl. I'm a big soundtrack fan. David Newman for Galaxy Quest, Leonard Rosenman for Voyage Home. We got to talk.
Absolutely. No, I was thinking of David Newman the whole time I was watching the show. I said, I mean, the theme almost sounds similar to that Galaxy Quest theme. And I love the fact that he took the material seriously, even if it was jokey at times. There was no jokiness about, there were no like, haha, that was a joke, let's do a little sting, you know, kind of thing on the score.
Yeah, he's playing it straight. I mean, which is what I heard him say he was attempting to do. So, you know, that's good. That's what I wanted.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a good quality sci-fi soundtrack, and I'm glad. Thanks for mentioning that too. That there were no kind of comedic stings or riffs, and I thinking back on it now, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Nothing that kind of stuff usually would stick out to me, and realizing that nothing stuck out to me, that's a good thing. But yeah, I definitely agree. The theme had a nice little Star Trek-y kind of feel, a sci-fi feel. I think it's going to be one of those themes that'll definitely be sticking in my head. It won't be an intro that I won't be skipping.
Yeah. And he mentioned Joel McNeely as his composer. Actually, I guess he's more of a long-term composer for the show. Did you? I didn't pick up that it was Bruce Broughton, but Joel McNeely was the guy Seth mentioned was his composer. You know, for the series. So, just throwing that out there for the other nerds.
For the other
all good names, so.
Yeah, right.
All right. So let's wrap up the initial impressions. Does everybody have anything else they'd like to throw out there before we move on to another topic about the show? Steve, anything else? Initial impressions?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. Mr. Wonders, last word.
Well, I mean, are we going to go into any of the specific moments, like comedy-wise, or is this the time to bring some?
I'm gonna jump into characters next, and then we can move on to some other stuff. So, all right, so let's talk about some characters. I'm just gonna run quickly through the list of regular characters that are going to be appearing on the show, and then we can talk a little bit about the ones that stood out to us or the ones that fell flat for us. So, of course, Seth MacFarlane plays Captain Ed Mercer, with his first officer Kelly Grayson, who is his ex-wife, played by Adrienne Palicki. Dr. Claire Finn, played by Penny Johnson-Gerald of DS9 fame, among many other things. The Gordon Malloy character is played by Scott Grimes. He's the helmsman of the ship. We have Lieutenant Commander Bortus, played by Peter Macon, who's a Moclan. It's a single-sexed alien race. To me, his personality feels Vulcan, but he looks vaguely Klingon, so it's a little bit of a Star Trek-y mix. We've got Alara Katan, who's played by Halston Sage, the ship's security officer and a member of the Salean race, which Carl mentioned earlier, which sounds an awful lot like the sacred Mount Saleya on Vulcan, I think, which was introduced for the first time in your first ever Star Trek experience with Star Trek 3.
Yes, I believe that's right.
So we get a little Star Trek nod there, even though Salean is spelled differently in the Orville than it is in Star Trek lore. But we also have John Lamar, played by Jay Lee. He's the ship's navigator. And finally, Isaac, which is the android or artificial life form of the Kalon race, played by Mark Jackson. So let's talk about particular thoughts on any of these characters. I'll start out by saying I think after watching this episode a few times that for me, one of the standouts is definitely the Alara Katan character, the security officer. This seemed like the most parody-ish character to me in some ways, because they have those ridiculously exaggerated alien powers made possible by the different gravity on her home world versus where she is now. I think it made for some really fun comedy and hero moments, especially the breakout scene from the laboratory, busting through the wall, and I think they make a big statement about her small stature and the amount of power that she has for her small size. I think there's some really cool hero moments in there. And some really funny little one-liners too. So I'm kind of looking forward to more moments from her in future episodes. What about you guys, Steve? Any standout characters for you amongst the regular cast?
Just first thought is I'm happy to see Penny Johnson Gerald in there as Dr. Finn, having just I'm rewatching Deep Space Nine now, and she was one of Cisco's love interests. She just did him wrong recently, but I like her way back to the Larry Sanders Show. So that was nice to see her there. Victor Garber as the Admiral. I'm a fan of his too. He's just a good thing. And Brian George. I'm picking some of the secondary characters, but Babu. Nice to see him. And he's been in so many things. And I hate to just pigeonhole him into that character, but it's he's always
it was a very Brian George part of for him. So
well cast again. Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead, Carl.
So I definitely agree that Alara Katan has a lot of potential and was an interesting character. One of the joke areas that I actually laughed the most at was with Bortus with the "there are no bars" moment.
He's got deadpan delivery down.
Yeah, his deadpan is perfect, and I know that there's been some, consternation on the internet about future stories around him, and I don't want to get into any of that. But for this episode, I think his comic timing definitely stood out for a show that was trying to be funny at times and not always succeeding. I think he was always successful at being funny when it was intended.
I definitely agree with that, and I the more I think about it. I said earlier that I thought he had a lot of Vulcan in him and he looked like a Klingon, but there were definitely some moments where he's felt kind of Klingon to me as well in his personality. So the way they've written the character, again, deadpan, very stoic, very rigid, but it gives a nice break to, I think, some of the more, I don't want to say toiletish humor, but there's some definite, sexually charged jokes on the show. So I think he stands up nicely as a juxtaposition to that type of humor.
Yeah. Thinking of the humor now, and I just kind of hit on something in my head about something I think is what's not working for me with the show. The humor was funny, at times, sometimes weak. The Star Trek stuff was adequate, we'll say, give them that. But I don't know if that humor fits with the Star Trek feel.
Yeah.
Galaxy Quest works because the humor was about, beaming up, can't think of his name, Tim Allen, and not wanting to dice him into cubes. So it was a tense situation made funny with like, we're working on it kind of humor. Seth MacFarlane's inserted humor, I liked the joke about when the guy was not in the center frame and he said, could you move over 2 feet? Because it's really distracting. So funny, but in the Star Trek world, like the guy would have enough patience to do that when he's negotiating with the captain. So it's a tough sell for me that humor is going to be able to sustain and keep a Star Trek vibe going. And I think that might be the issue for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I also think, like, when I think of MacFarlane, I think of a lot of these like non sequitur moments that just kind of, especially in his cartoons where he can do whatever he wants, and most MacFarlane moment in the entire show is when he gets the news about his ex-wife coming aboard and he's like, no. And he's running in the hallway and he runs through that Jello guy and he's like, oh, are you okay? He's like, yep, no problem. And I'm like, that's like totally out of Family Guy for me. Absolutely. Like that kind of like, we're going to stop the show in its tracks for 20 seconds to do this goofy joke and then move on. Yep. For me, I think the jokes, even some of the jokes worked. The problem is I almost think they needed another pass at editing on the script because there were at least 2 or 3 moments where they told a joke that was perfectly fine, but then they hang this lantern on it and they go back and forth like, we told a joke. Did you catch the joke? Like, it's like, oh, it's an anti-banana ray. Okay, that's not a great line, but it's amusing. But then they're like, oh, I guess we don't have to fear the banana anymore because it worked on salad, and it's like, you told the joke already. Let's move on. And the same thing with, the Happy Arbor Day line, which I actually laughed at. I thought that was a clever line, but then they're like, what's Arbor Day? I don't know what Arbor Day is, and I was like, okay, you ruined it for me a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like enough is enough,
I totally get it. That kind of thing stuck out to me too. Co-signing on your own jokes. It kind of, I agree. If they'd have done another pass, and there was a couple moments like that where they definitely didn't need to do a follow-up to a joke to call more attention to it. 'Cause I think some of those jokes really worked. I laughed at the the anti-banana ray joke. I thought that was a funny one, and and then I kind of groaned a little bit when they kind of did that next 2 beats before moving on from it. So I definitely agree with that. And maybe this is obviously it's the pilot episode. Maybe things get a little bit better from here as far as that's concerned. I guess we'll have to keep our eyes on future episodes to see if they keep doing that. Steve, did you pick up on that as well? The reiteration?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, definitely. Yeah. And then while you were just talking, I was thinking, the speed up time device that they ultimately used to resolve the problem. But when the woman fell under it and then she aged to 150 or whatever and died, remember her head fell into the, and for a minute you go like, oh, this is a serious moment. Or is it? Were they playing, not that they were playing that for laughs, but because he's trying to balance this goofy Star Trek world and real Star Trek world, I think there's going to be some moments where you go like, oh, that was bad.
Yeah.
I thought because they could have played that for laughs. What if she went 10 years and just like, oh, I just went through puberty or whatever, but if you do it 150 years, it's death. So it's not funny. So
yeah, definitely. Now that you mention it, she falls into the ray. She gets old. She falls on the floor, and Dr. Finn leans down and says she must be at least 125 years old in a very serious tone. But then they kind of go back to the humor. So you're like, was that supposed to be a funny moment, or was that supposed to be a serious moment? I kind of was left confused. It's one of those head scratcher moments where I think the comedy and the drama sort of collide, and you don't really know how to process it.
Right. Yeah, because then you go right from that into the whole, well, they're coming down for a pizza party like joke with the Krill,
and I actually like that joke.
I thought it was cute. It's just you have tonal whiplash a little bit. Yeah. I mean, it's not too bad, but it's something that they're going to have to keep in check, I think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more whiplashy moments.
But you're always going to have the expectation, though, with Seth that you're waiting for that next non sequitur, and that's a difficult, tightrope to walk. Yeah. King of the metaphors.
It definitely is, and I think like Carl was saying earlier, I think it works brilliantly on Family Guy. But I don't know if or An American Dad in a way, I don't know if it translates well to the live action on screen. Yep. I think you need the exaggeration of cartoon, where you can literally do anything you want, whereas you have this. Your brain doesn't necessarily know how to process it because you're watching actual live people.
I have a personal comedy barometer that is not perfected, so don't hold me to it. But, some things work as a joke. Some things work as a skit. Some things work as a sitcom. Some things work as a movie. I'm not sure where this one fits. This would be a great skit, shorter, do all the gags, get in and out, have some Star Trek fun, and you're done. Is it going to work as a sustained 1 hour long series? I expect more Star Trek adventures with Seth MacFarlane humor injected into it. Is that it? Or is there a place he can take it to another level? I don't know.
I don't know either. Maybe we're looking at it devil's advocate. Maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Maybe he's trying to break new ground and do something different. We have our traditional views of what Star Trek is and what sci-fi is and what comedy is, and maybe he's trying to merge them in his own way. Whether or not that works for us, I haven't talked to a lot of people face to face about this. I've just seen some reactions on Twitter and Facebook and read some things in reviews by reviewers online, but I don't know what the general consensus of most everyday people. I know they had something. They had a pretty decent viewership for the first episode. I don't have the exact number here, but it was okay share. It wasn't anything humongous, but they still don't have the DVR numbers posted yet. But so Carl, what are your thoughts on the traditional definitions of comedy and sci-fi being merged together and not working versus, maybe Seth trying to break some new ground?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say just because, I don't know if he's really breaking new ground here. Sci-fi and comedy have gone together. You look at an episode like The Trouble with Tribbles. That's sci-fi comedy right there. Comedy can be anything really. And this is more him injecting his, Seth MacFarlane take on what's funny into that universe. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But I think enough of the show worked for me on whatever level it was trying to, whether it's dramatic or comedic, that I think the show could, it's going to have to do either one or the other better to be sustainable for the 13 episodes or whatever it is that they have planned. I enjoyed this episode. I don't know if I'd enjoy 12 more like it without it becoming kind of stale. But I do think that he's talented enough to pull it off. Sometimes for me, I think MacFarlane's biggest problem is he can't get out of his own way. And he overdoes it when he doesn't need. It's like, you're good at you turn it up to 11 and you would have been fine at a 6 or a 7, and it's just to see if he can kind of rein that in and trust the material a little bit and shake it up a little bit at times when it's called for.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment too. I don't know. Right now I'm still on the positive side, but if we have 12 more or whatever episodes that strike the exact same notes, it may get a little bit tired. Getting back to the characters, and we talked about the characters that we thought we had good impressions of. I'm going to flip it around a little bit, and I'm going to come right out and say I think it feels to me like, and Seth, if you ever listen to this, I hope this doesn't offend you in any way, but I felt like the Captain Ed Mercer character might have been among the weakest characters on the show just by the first episode alone, and maybe that changes, but I think many of the other characters had much more standout moments and felt more genuine to me than Seth did. And I don't know if it's me having trouble separating, Seth MacFarlane from this character, or if I'm getting an accurate read on it. Did either of you guys feel that the Captain Ed Mercer character didn't feel strong?
I'm going to give them an ounce of credit. Jon Favreau directed. I'm guessing that they feel that Seth has to be the anchor to this show, and and let the comedy kind of be around him. Because if he just does jokes, then you're not going to buy him as a captain. So unfortunately, that makes him have to be a little more down the middle. I agree with you, Jeff. I don't think he's a strong character, but I'm wondering if they said, we're going to make this work. We're going to pull this off. Star Trek with some laughs. We need to sell it. But I felt both Captain Mercer and Commander Grayson were pretty run-of-the-mill characters. Their tension was played up for laughs. I was surprised that they sort of resolved it at the end of the episode. Yeah. They seem I'm sure that more tensions will arise, but
a funny point too, Steve, by the tension, just really before we lose that point, the tension between those two characters, I felt was better or more palpable or more evident later in the episode than it was in that opening sequence where it should have been. But there were some moments later on where I felt the tension was a little bit better. I don't know. Did that play for you guys the same way?
Yep.
It did. And I also agree with both of you about, the Ed Mercer character. I think in a way, it's a victim of the, show don't tell problem with the script where, you hear from Victor Garber that he's a good officer who had a problem, ran into trouble, and you hear about his attributes rather than see them on screen. His friend, the helmsman, is talking him up, or you hear it from his ex-wife, or you hear it from the admiral. You don't actually see him do, but frankly, he doesn't do that much in the entire episode. He tells a few one-liners, some of them better than others. But I'd like to see him grow into a character that you actually believe the attributes that have been said about him. I didn't see him as a really competent officer who, had his marriage fall apart, and because of that, he kind of fell off the wagon, so to speak, and has to get back on. Other than the fact that we were just told that explicitly.
Yeah. So
it's.
Go ahead, Steve.
I was just say it's funny that they let Commander Grayson have the moment to figure out the solution when it would have been interesting to let him do it.
Yeah.
To have the captain moment. But
True.
I know they needed it for that part of the story, but I agree with you, Carl. I think something needs to be done.
So, this leads perfectly into, one of the concerns that I had mentioned earlier, which was listening to, or, watching this episode and listening to the trailers and reading some of the promo materials for this show. It feels like they want to make one of the backbones of this show the tension between Mercer and his ex-wife / first officer. And it did kind of feel like they sort of quasi-resolved it, at least by the end of this one. But if this is going to be an ongoing theme that's going to travel through the entire series, it felt like it got a little overplayed to me, even in the first episode. Do you guys think that that's something that would make the show better, or they should really continue on the path of, the resolution that they came to at the end of this one and not kind of go backwards on it?
Yeah, they played a couple of cards early, I thought, including the one where she turns out to be the one that got him on the ship. So, I was surprised. I mean, I get it. Script structure, it kind of sets up some more, future tension, but it kind of already downplays their problem. So, he appreciates her at the end. They're buddies. He wants her on the ship. And then she's got this kind of hanging over him like, and I helped you. Not that she wanted to tell him, but so that's a lot out there already. So I'm wondering, to your point, Jeff, like where's that going to go?
Yeah, I feel the same way. Although, in some ways, I'm almost glad that they played their hand the way they did, because I would get tired of that dynamic just because it's so overplayed on a lot of shows these days. That the tension between ex-wives, ex-husband, or ex-partners, or what have you. It seems very kind of cliched at this point. And it also kind of allows them to maybe focus on some of the other characters, which is one of the strengths of maybe not the original series of Star Trek, but certainly the later ones, where you would have, let's have a John Lamar episode. Let's have a Lara Katan episode. The only thing I know about John Lamar is he likes to drink soda on the bridge. That was about his defining attribute, which that shot of him getting the cup and taking a sip from it was kind of funny. And I laughed at that moment, but that's all I know about the character, really. So to maybe, especially when you only have 13 episodes, to flesh out these other members of the crew a little bit, I would much prefer that versus, watching Mercer and Grayson bicker over and over again.
I completely agree with that. And I am only assuming this because of Seth MacFarlane's love for Star Trek, that they would kind of go down that road, the same Star Trek-y type road, where we do get episodes that are more focused on a certain character that gives them a chance to develop. I hope that that's the route that it goes, because I agree that if they stick with the same motif for every single episode and just focus on that as the central crux or tension between the two of them, and don't give anybody else any screen time to develop more, it would definitely take away from my immersion in the show, because I think some of those other characters are really interesting. I think there's a lot that could be. I guess we're going to get a Bortus episode at some point. Again, we're not going to talk about it now because there was a little sizzle reel at the end that gave you little clips of other episodes, and there definitely was quite a bit of it dedicated to that upcoming Bortus episode. But Steve, do you have an appetite for more character development for the other characters?
Yeah, just 10 seconds before I answer that question, I also like the John Lamar character. And one other moment of his, besides the soda, which was funny, was when he walked into the room and they were talking about Mercer's relationship, and he said, "We can't talk about this now." He goes, "Oh no, we're talking about it now."
That's a thing. Yeah,
I like that.
It's a thing. Yeah.
I like that guy. So that was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, character development, great, but as Jeff and I talk about many times, too much character development, too many characters. You know, the original series occasionally had a Scotty episode, occasionally had a little Chekhov romance, but stay with the core, and that's what we love. In the other shows, too many characters suddenly need their own episodes, and those episodes are not as strong as the others. So if we find, but we got to find the characters, got to flesh them out. I get all that, but it's another danger zone. That it's a slippery slope. What do you have? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm looking at the list. 5, 6. Got 6 or 7 characters on there. I don't know if we need to know about everybody.
Yeah.
That's a fair point too, because I had also lamented that. You're right, Steve. I had lamented, once you give everybody, enough screen time and enough episodes dedicated to them, then it becomes, everybody has to have their hero moment in every episode, or film, as the case may be, and I think it may eventually detract from the episodes. Carl, what do you think?
No, I mean, you definitely have to walk that fine line. I mean, if anything, they might have overstuffed the crew a little bit. And again, this is operating off of one episode, not seeing the bulk. But I don't know what the Isaac character honestly brings to the show, other than we can have these faux Spock moments on occasion about not understanding what suck means and stuff like that. Which, again, I guess it played for comedy, but if they had jettisoned him as a character, I don't think the show would have suffered, at least at this point.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone agrees with me there. I think
Yep.
he was easily the most dispensable of the characters so far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, they only gave him a couple of lines, and they set him up as the the quote unquote racist character at the beginning when they were doing their little crew introductions in the shuttle bay, and you got introduced to every one of them. And he's from a race that's notoriously anti-human, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that sets him up for the future to be,
Did I miss anything? Were there any moments in there where he was anti-human? Because I heard them set that up, and I was waiting for the follow-up, and I'm like, okay, where was it coming later? I don't remember. Like, why'd you mention
episodes?
that?
Maybe I didn't. There was nothing. The jokes that I remember with him were all kind of misunderstanding what they were talking about. Jokes.
Yep.
The fish out of water.
And it was confusing to me during the crew introductions, because they did the whole thing about you're legendary for your racism and all this stuff. So why are you on the ship? He's like, we wanted to learn more about you. And it's like, would a racist group of people want to learn more about the people they think aren't worthwhile? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying we even need to have a racist character on in the show. Frankly, I don't understand that tone.
Him up for a redemption story.
Yeah, I guess, but it just seems so inconsistent that you would say, well, they think humans are, beneath them, but then we want to learn more about the humans, which I don't know. It didn't jive for me, really.
It definitely felt like he could have been jettisoned. You're right.
Yeah.
What did you say, Steve?
I was just going to say, in defense of the cast, to be on the positive side, you're creating a Star Trek spoof. You're creating humor. I mean, you're intending it to be humorous. You're going to set up this cast. People are going to expect. I expected. I want to see the mix of species. I want a little hint of the Spock Data character. If you're going to do it, you got to do it. They're not creating a new Star Trek series. They're referencing what everybody loves. So first episode is tough. Got to get everybody in there. You don't want to say, oh, by the way, we had this other character who just happened to be not on the bridge last week. So you got to bring everybody in.
Yeah.
Fair
so we'll give them some time.
Yeah. No,
I'm arguing what I was arguing against.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want it to sound like we're just bashing this thing. These are just nitpicks, but I said earlier that I thought there was a lot of promise in a lot of these characters, and I did enjoy most of them, if not all of them, in some way at some point in the episode. So, kudos to the casting on a lot of these characters too. I think a lot of them played their characters very well. I'm excited to see more of the Doctor in the future, because I think she's got a lot of potential, and I got a lot of laughs out of Bortus and the Alara Katan. I love that too. So I think there's a lot of promise, and I don't want to get into too much of that sizzle reel because I saw some cool moments in there. So I think we're going to get some better moments from these characters in the future too. So Carl, what were you going to say?
No, I'm just saying I'm in addition to the main cast, I'm kind of holding out hope that we get a return of Justin the Ogre because I thought he was
a hoot. Was very cool. Yeah, I like that whole holodeck programming thing. I like that they carried that over, and that was very fun. It was a nice fun moment. It gave you a lot of insight into the Gordon character, the helmsman. That's when you got a little bit of backstory too. So that was cool. So anything else on any of these characters before we move on to some other things from this episode? I want to talk a little bit about the Krill, of course, which I think to me feel like they're setting up to be like the Klingons of the Orville universe. We didn't get a lot of dialogue from them aside from that exchange with the Krill captain of the ship when they kind of go into the marriage jokes with him, which actually I really like. Well, hold on for that for a minute. I kind of thought the appearance of these characters, the Krill characters, were sort of a takeoff on maybe Idris Elba's Crawl character from Star Trek Beyond in a way, just with different skin color. I thought that the name might have been a little bit of a giveaway where some of the inspiration for it came from. But do you guys have any observations about the Krill that you want to throw out there? I thought that that gag with the framing on the view screen was funny. I got a good laugh out of that.
Yep.
And the subsequent short conversation about marriage with the evil ship's commander, I thought was really funny. Carl, I heard you laughing. What do you think?
No, I definitely thought the same way. I thought, especially the framing one, was maybe my biggest laugh out loud moment because it was just. And if anything, I thought the captain really reminded me of Saris from Galaxy Quest.
Good call.
Like not in his look, but just the exchanges that they had, and almost even the whole gosh darn it, you can have it, but let's put it in a box first kind of thing, where they're actually going to give him the device, the MacGuffin, and just the way he would start talking, and then all of a sudden he'd scream at them and fire the, he definitely seemed out of the Saris mold.
Definitely. Steve, any thoughts on that exchange or the Krill commander?
No, that was the preview clip that they chose, rightly so. Like I said before, I enjoyed that one too. And then the exchange with Ed and wife about that played out a bit. So, I mean, that was a good bit. And the guy slipping directly to, of course, I wouldn't do that, or of course, whatever he said. So, I mean, that was good. Not to go back to what we said, but that was a nice moment. Then it's like, oh, we got to get back to the plot. So we have to resolve this thing. So, I was. You're still talking about the cast, but good point was, the cast is good, production values are good. So, if I were to reiterate my opening, it's like it all looks right. One thing I was going to mention before in the other conversation was, as the tension level rises, the comedy has to take a back seat, and I think that's where it gets off balance. I mean, like how serious an episode can they have? Where they might have to have a 10-minute sequence to resolve a very serious challenge or thing, and then get back to the comedy. Are they going to be cracking wise while the ship is blown open and 5 crewmen have been thrown out into space? Like it's going to be tough. So I didn't mean to digress.
That's actually a good segue back into the escape scene from the lab area where you see the Krill soldiers are shooting at them, and they actually Ed Mercer gets shot in the shoulder. So there's a bit of a serious bit there, where they go from the funny parts of the pizza party thing to escaping into the hallway, and then they have to run past the assaulting Krill soldiers who are firing at them, and you get the captain getting injured, and then you get to the comedy moment with Alara breaking through the big wall. So you kind of have a comedy heavy moment, comedy bookend there, which was another one of those kind of jarring moments where I hadn't completely shifted out of the comedy mode to get to the serious mode for the
Mm-hmm.
shootout scene, and then back to the comedy mode, which actually the busting through the wall and the high jumping escape by Alara cracked me up. So it was the pacing was tough in that scene. I think Carl, what did you pick up on that too?
I did a little bit, and actually, you reminded me of my other favorite joke moment, and I think some of the best opportunities for the comedy in these types of shows are the observational things where somebody notices something that, everyone has these things about Star Trek where it's like, where do they go to the bathroom? There's no bathrooms. And, maybe that, that kind of thing where you notice something about a show that nobody's kind of picked up on. And the moment was they're about to make a break for it. And they tell Brian George, get behind Alana. And he's like, well, which one's Alana? And she's like, it's me. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm still learning your name, because it's like, of course, they just met like 5 minutes ago. So he's not going to know who these people are. So that one made me laugh out loud because I'm like, oh, yeah, that never would have occurred to me as a joke, but it's kind of obvious when it's pointed out to you that he wouldn't know who these people are. So why would he know what to do?
That was good. And something Jeff and I like to talk about is the, which seems like this is the venue for this, the facilities crew that takes care of the ship, or what happens at night when everybody's sleeping. Is there a night crew, and do they come in and vacuum it sometime? Because they never do on the old shows, but this is the time to do that. Somebody's got to do it, right? They spill a drink, the guy's drinking soda.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. Well, you had the going to the bathroom reference in the hallway scene between the first officer and the helmsman, where he's trying to go to the bathroom, and they get into that little bit of a conversation, and he references it a couple more times as he's going down the hallway that he has to pee first, before he does some other things. So I like that they kind of threw that in there, although they did oversell that joke a little bit in my mind, but it was nice that they threw that out there, because that was always a nice joke. Even in First Contact, they threw out the "Don't you people ever pee" joke. So it's definitely out there in the lexicon that people wonder about going to the bathroom in the future. So nice.
I actually like the exchange when he was talking about he only what's his name, only pees once a year.
Yeah.
Versus,
really,
that was fun. Two or three times a night.
That is unfortunate.
Other things you learn about different races, different aliens as you meet them. Yeah.
Well, I like that he's kind of holding up the Star Trek torch and having these little weird, quirky things about all the alien races, and he's exaggerating, obviously, some of them, but I think they did a pretty good job with that. So getting back to finally the Krill, I mean, Steve's opinions about them overall. I mean, we saw the hulking, brutish warriors down on the planet in the lab shooting everything up. And did you get a Klingon vibe from them, Steve, as well, or?
I didn't get a Klingon vibe, but I did get the sense of maybe this is going to be their villain, and I think that's good. It's good to have a regular bad guy to show up. I didn't really place him. I actually thought of Saris as well, but maybe it's just the spiky head and the attitude. But I'm again thinking of them setting up this series. I'm sure they said, who's going to be our Klingon? Who's going to be our regular, challenge? So, but it was fine.
So, Steve, I wanted to really quickly turn back to, since we have a time travel expert here on the show, I thought it was very fortuitous that the MacGuffin in this episode is actually a time travel device in a way. And we talked about it a little bit before. So the quantum field technology, or the time travel in a bubble concept that they introduced in this episode. So Steve, I wanted to ask you, in your database, are there any other time travel devices that are similar, or is this something that they came up with that's unique?
Like a time accelerator. There have been things like that. I'm sure Doctor Who has encountered that, for good and bad. No, it's a bit, I mean, I like that it was self-contained. I don't know if I would eat the redwood tree seed. Another good Brian George moment. And it makes a nice snack. And just popping one of those in your mouth, I'd be like, maybe not. But it was, nice little device. They set it up. They used it later. So I mean, I thought it was decent.
All right. So I thought it kind of felt like something we could have seen on an episode of Star Trek. It seemed like an almost Star Trek-y device to me. Carl, did you feel like you could have seen that on Trek?
Yeah, well, not so much a device, but it reminded me a little bit of the bubbles in Timescape when they have the bowl of fruit that molds because that they have on the runabout. Remember when that was like the first thing that occurred to me when they said time goes faster, and it's like they had those weird like subspace bubbles that would either accelerate or slow down time depending on what bubble you were in. So that kind of came back to me, and definitely Doctor Who. There's one episode when the Doctor ends up getting aged really quickly because of this device that he has used on him. So it's definitely pulling from things that I've recognized, but I don't know if I've seen it quite used in that way before, and certainly not as a MacGuffin that then solves the problem in the way that it does. That was and that was something I liked because it was unique, and I thought it was actually set up really well that it would be the solution to the problem.
Yep. The funny thing for that is, and I'm not knocking this show, is like every show, you've got that thing. Wouldn't that help you resolve a lot of situations? But it's not going to come up. It's not going to be the tool of choice. It's going to be, a new tool of choice.
Yes.
So, but that's not a fault of theirs. It's just a funny thing how that works.
So does this episode of the Orville earn a spot on Paradox Parkway's time travel database?
Of course, I thought of that at that moment. Carl, just so you know, I'm compiling, quote, every incident, and I have a broad spectrum of what counts as time travel because I want to have fun with it and chat about it. So, yeah.
I'll admit I have your website open, and I've been resisting looking at it just so I don't get off track here. But I'm definitely going to be looking it over as soon as we wrap here. So
yeah, it's
definitely piqued my interest.
Thank you for looking. It's always in development, and I think we're going to have a bit of a data surge in a couple of days. So if you'd like, you can wait a couple of days. But the intent is, yes, Jeff, I'll have to add the Orville grudgingly to my to my world.
So who's the time traveler, the banana or the scientist?
Or the redwood tree.
Or the redwood tree.
Yeah, so it's not really time travel, but it's time manipulation, and that counts.
So, all right. So we've been chatting for a little over an hour now. So, Carl, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up about the premiere of the Orville that we didn't touch on yet?
The only thing other than things we've talked about are, some of my favorite lines from the episode, and we've talked about most of them. The whole, when Gordon asks, are there any bars on the planet? And Orta says, I could look into it. And he's like, don't. He's like, I already have the information. Do you want me to withhold it? He's like, there are no bars. That was probably the best sustained back and forth I felt from a comedic standpoint. The line when they're on Brian George is giving them the tour, and he gets them the redwood seeds, and they're trying to like, why are we here? Why are we here? And then they do the banana thing, and he's like, a month has passed, and Seth MacFarlane says, you mean since we started talking? Yeah, it feels that way. I thought it was a good line, and I'm not usually one for toilet humor, but I thought that the Doctor's line about his inadequacies in his balls, I thought was amusing, and something that seemed very in character for her as a doctor, and just knowing her from other work, it seems like a line that she would have said. It didn't seem like something that was just written and didn't fit her personality. So I enjoyed that a lot. Other than that, I think we've pretty much hit all the points I wanted to.
I made a point of raising all my points throughout our discussion. We did mention Norm Macdonald very briefly. I thought that was a great casting. Having that voice just show up once an episode or however they're going to do it, I think is going to be a pleasant opportunity. And I know Seth, in his discussion that I saw, mentioned that it's like a great gig. He comes in for 20 minutes, does the line, and he's out of there. So, but I think it's a good bit. So
Yeah, I enjoyed that bit, and that was one of a few laugh out loud bits of the Norm Macdonald blob, and I know that he's
Yep.
supposed to show up in future episodes. I don't know if it's going to be the same character or not, but I would like to see the blob at least recur a few more times.
It's funny. I didn't know what he was going to look like, so my expectation was he's going to be like on a plate, almost like a piece of cake. That's how big I thought he was going to be. I didn't realize he was going to be like, beach ball size or whatever he was. Yeah. So, but that's not a problem. It's just I'm going, oh, he's big.
Well, Tricorder listeners know of my affinity for non-humanoid aliens, so the Norm Macdonald blob definitely falls into that category. So he automatically gets a big thumbs up from me. So, all right. So, in closing on this episode, why don't we go around and just give out some final thoughts? Are you going to watch any more of this? What are your hopes for the future? Things of that nature. And I'll start off by saying that I'm definitely going to continue to watch the show. I found it overall quite enjoyable. I kind of made some peace with some things that I had some concerns with, even though I feel like I was a little bit more nitpicky in this conversation than I'd really wanted to be. Overall, I'm very happy with it, and I'm looking forward to future episodes. So I'm coming out of this with a very positive outlook and hoping for the best. And of course, the inner Seth MacFarlane fan, the longtime Family Guy lover, I always root for him. He's one of the guys that he's a talented guy other than comedy as well. So I'd love to see him succeed with this. I know this is a dream of his, so I'm rooting for him. What about you, Carl?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I think it innocuous it's not quite the right word, but in terms of, these types of parodies, especially with a track record of some of the comedy that Seth MacFarlane has done in the past, could have gone pretty much the wrong way. I think the fact that he's absolutely in love with the material that he's, referencing and in some ways parodying, I think tempers that in a good way. But then also, like we said earlier, it might be almost to the detriment of the comedy where he doesn't want to poke too much fun. Mm-hmm. But I'd rather see him play it safe than go over the line, which he's done before. Yep. And I think that, it like I said, it was better than I expected going in. It didn't blow my socks off or anything. The second time I watched it, I didn't roll my eyes at it like I did a couple times the first time. But it certainly merits, watching the second episode and seeing where it goes. And my hope is that, the script gets tightened a bit more and they figure out the formula a little bit better and it gets better from there.
All right. Final word goes to you, Steve.
All right. So I had high expectations going in and tempered expectations for Discovery. And we were joking that it'd be funny if the Orville did better than Discovery. We'll see how that plays out. So I want this to be a good show. I enjoyed our chat today, and I grudgingly will probably watch another episode. No, I think I'll give it a shot. I want it to succeed also.
Okay, well, I, as a guy who typically does not like spoiling things for myself, I will drop a little hint that I found out about the next episode of this. It won't ruin the show. It won't ruin anything about the episode, but the next episode, called Command Performance, is being directed by none other than Voyager's own Robert Duncan McNeil. So, interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he does in the director's chair for the next episode. So maybe that's a little bit of an incentive since Steve is rewatching Voyager right now.
That's true. That's true.
All right. Well, Steve Sikoryak and Carl Wonder, thank you guys so much for coming on for this show. And Steve, let the audience know where they can find you on social media and the web if they're looking for you.
The best place right now is Steve at paradoxparkway.com.
Very cool. And obviously you can go to paradoxparkway.com to check out Steve's incredibly exhaustive database. And again, not going to spoil anything for you, but you guys might hear some pretty cool sound clips on that website. Just saying. I get to hear a lot of these things as they get recorded. So
the quick commercial and the early features of the site are: there's a today and time. So every day you can see what TV episodes, birthdays, or movies were released on this day and time with the appropriate cast member who might be chiming in for a hello. There are 3 short videos, a little movie montage, a TV montage, and a cartoon montage of some time travel highlights. And there's even a game. If you scroll down, there's a guess the tagline. One more time. Guess the movie title based on the tagline you're provided. So little time travel fun.
And maybe we can pull Carl Wonders back into the show as he's perusing the website now, as he said all that stuff. So, Carl, where can people find you?
You can hear my clicking over here. Darn. So I can be found on Twitter, creatively at Carl Wonders, no spaces or anything like that. And my website, which I am trying to get back up and running, listeningtofilm.net. And that's pretty much the best way.
So, and everybody knows I'm Warp Factor Jeff on Twitter. And if you're looking for this show, it's tricordertransmissions.com, at Tricorder Show on Twitter. And we're also on Facebook / the Tricorder Transmissions. So we're out there. So give us some feedback. Tell us what you think, what were your first impressions of the Orville. We'd like to talk about it with you as well, and hopefully we'll hear from you. And I'm not sure if we're going to do more follow-ups on the Orville or not. I guess we'll have to talk about that and see how things shake out with the next few episodes. And so thanks again, everybody, for listening to the 40th Supplemental Log. I can't believe it's the 40th Supplemental Log already. But we'll be back with you again next week with, I believe, a Trek Ranks episode. And I think it's going to be an interesting one because we're going to have really cool special guests coming on that may be a big surprise because these 2 guys have been on our show separately in the past, but never together. So I'll leave it at that. So thanks again for listening, everybody out there. And thanks again to Steve and Carl for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys again on the Tricorder Transmission. Hi there, thanks again for listening. If you're cruising the galaxy looking for even more Trek talk, why not visit our good friends Bill and Dan over at TrekGeeks.com? They've got a great podcast that covers a wide range of Star Trek topics, so you're sure to find something you'll love. And if you're in the mood for some awesome tunes, then you really need to head over to 5yearmission.net. The guys are writing a song for every episode of the original series, and each one is absolutely brilliant. So that's TrekGeeks.com and 5yearmission.net. Check them out today.